Welcome back to One Book, One Coffee, where we dive deep into the books that shape minds and change perspectives. If you're here for George Orwell's Animal Farm, you're already different from most people scrolling through their feeds right now. While others are consuming mindless content, you've chosen to spend your time with one of the most important allegories ever written. That choice says something remarkable about you. You're someone who values understanding over entertainment, depth over distraction. Animal Farm isn't just a story about talking animals on a farm. It's a masterpiece of political satire that exposes how power corrupts, how revolutions can betray their own ideals, and how language itself becomes a weapon of control. This slim book has been banned in countless countries, sparked revolutions of thought, and remains as relevant today as when it was first published. Christopher Hitchens called it the best short novel in the English language, and Time magazine included it in their list of the 100 best English language novels. Even today's tech leaders reference its warnings about surveillance and manipulation of truth. George Orwell wrote this book in 1944, drawing from his own disillusionment with Stalin's Soviet Union after witnessing the Spanish Civil War firsthand. He saw how noble revolutionary ideals could be twisted into tyranny, how some animals are more equal than others became the reality behind socialist promises. Orwell was dying of tuberculosis when he wrote this, pouring his final warnings about totalitarianism into every page. He knew he was running out of time to warn the world. Now, a quick note before we dive in. This is a detailed chapter-by-chapter walkthrough, so it's going to be a longer session. Take your time with it. There's no rush. If you need to step away, save this video to your watch later or forward the link to yourself on WhatsApp so you can pick up right where you left off. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's walk through this masterpiece together chapter by chapter, idea by idea. Let's begin. Picture this. You're settling in with your favorite cup of coffee, steam rising from the mug, and I'm about to tell you about one of the most powerful opening acts in all of literature. We're diving into George Orwell's Animal Farm. And trust me, what starts as a simple story about farm animals becomes something that will make you see power, politics, and human nature in an entirely new light. It all begins on a cold night at Manor Farm, where an old boar named Major calls together all the animals for what he knows will be his final speech. Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever had that elderly relative or mentor who suddenly becomes urgent about sharing their life's wisdom? That's exactly what's happening here. Major is dying, and he's got something revolutionary to say. Major stands before this motley crew of horses, cows, pigs, chickens, and dogs, and he paints a picture that's both heartbreaking and infuriating. He tells them to look around at their lives, really look. The horses work until they collapse, only to be sent to the glue factory when they're no longer useful. The cows give milk until they're dry, then face the butcher's knife. The chickens lay eggs that are stolen from under them, and when they stop laying, it's soup time. Sound familiar? It's like those conversations we have about feeling trapped in systems that seem designed to extract everything from us while giving back the bare minimum. But here's where Major's speech becomes truly electrifying. He doesn't just complain about their situation, he offers them a vision. He tells them about a dream he had, a dream of a world where animals live free from human tyranny. He describes green fields where animals roam without fear, where the fruits of their labor belong to them, where no creature calls another master. It's their version of the American dream, if you will, but with hooves and feathers instead of hopes and aspirations. The genius of Major's message lies in how he identifies the enemy. It's not just Mr. Jones, their particular farmer, it's the entire system of human dominance. Think about how powerful movements throughout history have worked. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't just criticize individual racist acts, he challenged the entire system of segregation. Major does the same thing here, telling the animals that their enemy is man himself, who consumes without producing, who takes their labor and gives back only enough to keep them from starving. Then comes the moment that gives me chills every time. Major teaches them a song, Beasts of England. Now, you might wonder why a song matters in a revolutionary context, but think about it. What did the civil rights movement have? We shall overcome. What did the labor movement sing? Solidarity forever. Songs unite people, they create shared identity, and they turn individual grievances into collective action. When those animals start singing together, something magical and terrifying happens. They stop seeing themselves as separate creatures and start seeing themselves as a unified force. But here's what makes this story so brilliantly unsettling. Major dies just 3 days after his speech. He never sees his revolution come to pass. How often does this happen in real life? The visionaries plant the seeds but don't live to see the harvest. Moses never entered the promised land. The founders of movements often become martyrs to causes that outlive them. What happens next is both inspiring and ominous. The animals, fired up by Major's vision, begin organizing. The pigs, being the most intelligent, naturally take leadership roles. They develop Major's ideas into a complete system of thought they call animalism. It's like watching a philosophical movement being born. These simple principles about animal equality and human evil start becoming doctrine, complete with commandments and rules. The actual rebellion happens almost by accident, which is how many revolutions actually unfold. Mr. Jones goes on a drinking bender, forgets to feed the animals, and when they break into the store shed to eat, he and his men try to whip them back. But something's different now. The animals fight back. Years of resentment explode in a moment of collective fury. Within minutes, Jones and his men are running for their lives, and the animals find themselves in control of the farm. Now think about this moment. It's intoxicating, isn't it? The oppressed have overthrown their oppressors through their own power. They rename the place Animal Farm, destroy the instruments of their subjugation, and paint their principles on the barn wall. 7 commandments that all boil down to one simple idea: all animals are equal. But as we settle deeper into our coffee and this story, we need to ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions. What happens when the revolutionaries become the rulers? How do you maintain the purity of a vision when you have to deal with the messy reality of governing? And most chillingly, how do you prevent the very power you fought against from corrupting those who now wield it? The rebellion has begun, but as Orwell is about to show us, winning the revolution might be the easy part. The real test comes in what you do with victory, and that's where our story gets really interesting. Picture this. You've just overthrown your oppressive boss, kicked out all the corrupt managers, and now you and your coworkers control the entire company. The first thing you'd probably do is sit down and figure out the rules, right? What principles will guide this brave new workplace? Well, that's exactly where we find ourselves in Animal Farm, and let me tell you, the animals are about to create something that sounds absolutely perfect on paper. After the euphoric victory of the rebellion, the pigs gather all the animals together for what might be the most important meeting in Animal Farm's history. Napoleon, Snowball, and especially the brilliant Squealer have been busy. They've taken old Major's revolutionary speech and distilled it into 7 crystal-clear commandments that will govern their new society. Now, think about this for a moment. Isn't this what every revolution promises? A clean slate, a perfect set of rules that will prevent all the corruption and inequality of the old system. The pigs unveil these commandments with great ceremony, painting them in large white letters on the tarred wall of the big barn. Picture the scene. Animals gathered in reverent silence as these sacred principles are revealed, each one seeming to address exactly what went wrong under Farmer Jones. The first commandment declares that whatever goes on 2 legs is an enemy. Simple enough, humans are the oppressors, so no humans allowed. The second states that whatever goes on 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Unity among the oppressed, solidarity forever. But here's where it gets interesting. The third commandment prohibits animals from wearing clothes, the fourth forbids sleeping in beds, The fifth bans drinking alcohol, and the sixth absolutely prohibits killing other animals. The seventh and final commandment: all animals are equal. Read them together, and you've got what sounds like a utopian constitution, a society free from human vices, where every creature has equal standing and mutual respect. Now, doesn't this remind you of something? Think about any revolutionary movement you've studied or witnessed. The American Revolution promised life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all, though all had some pretty significant asterisks attached. The French Revolution declared liber, galet, fraternit, and we all know how that turned out. Even modern corporate mission statements follow this pattern. We believe in transparency, equality, and putting people first, right up until the quarterly earnings call. What's fascinating about these 7 commandments is how they seem to anticipate every possible corruption. It's like the animals studied every failed revolution in history and said, "We won't make those mistakes." No luxury items like clothes that create class distinctions. No comfortable beds that separate the rulers from the ruled. No alcohol that clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. And absolutely no violence against fellow animals. Because wasn't it violence and oppression that they were fighting against in the first place? The genius of Orwell's writing here is how reasonable these commandments sound. You find yourself nodding along, thinking, yes, this could actually work. And that's exactly the trap. Every totalitarian regime in history has started with beautiful principles. Stalin's Soviet Union promised a workers' paradise where everyone would be equal. Mao's China pledged to eliminate class distinctions and create perfect harmony. Even Hitler's Nazi Germany claimed to be building a 1,000-year Reich of prosperity and order. But here's the thing about perfect principles: they require perfect people to implement them, and animals, like humans, are decidedly imperfect. The very pigs who created these commandments are already showing signs of the corruption they're trying to prevent. They've appointed themselves the teachers and organizers. They're the ones who can read and write. They're already creating a hierarchy even as they preach equality. Think about your own workplace or community. How many times have you seen beautiful mission statements posted on walls while the actual culture operates by completely different rules? "We value work-life balance," says the company that expects you to answer emails at midnight. "All voices matter here," claims the organization where only certain people ever seem to get promoted. The 7 commandments of Animal Farm represent something we see over and over in human society: the gap between our ideals and our reality. They're not inherently evil principles. In fact, they're quite admirable. But they're being created and enforced by creatures who, despite their good intentions, carry within them the same capacity for corruption, self-interest, and rationalization that plagues every society. As we watch these commandments get painted on the barn wall, gleaming white and seemingly permanent, we're witnessing the birth of what the animals believe will be their salvation. But Orwell is already showing us the seeds of their destruction, hidden not in the commandments themselves, but in the very nature of those who will interpret and enforce them. And that sets us up perfectly for what comes next, watching how these beautiful principles will be tested when reality comes knocking at Animal Farm's gate. Picture this: you're settling into your favorite coffee shop, and suddenly you overhear a heated argument at the next table about workplace politics. 2 coworkers are debating who deserves credit for landing a big client, while completely ignoring the fact that their biggest competitor just opened a branch across the street. Sound familiar? This is exactly what Orwell shows us in the Battle of Cowshed, where external threats have a funny way of both uniting people and revealing the cracks that were already forming beneath the surface. So here we are, back on Animal Farm, where the animals have successfully kicked out Farmer Jones and are trying to figure out how to run things themselves. But here's the thing about revolutions that nobody tells you in the history books: winning is actually the easy part. It's what comes next that gets messy. The animals are discovering this the hard way, as they face their first real test from the outside world. Now think about this for a moment. When Jones and his buddies from neighboring farms decide they're going to take back Animal Farm by force, something interesting happens. All those petty squabbles between Napoleon and Snowball, all the subtle power plays and philosophical differences, suddenly get pushed to the back burner. Why? Because nothing unites a group quite like a common enemy. It's like when your family might bicker constantly at home, but the moment someone from outside criticizes one of your siblings, suddenly you're all on the same team again. The Battle of Cowshed itself is this fascinating moment where we see the animals at their most heroic and unified. Snowball, who's been studying military tactics with the same intensity that some people binge-watch Netflix series, has actually prepared for this moment. He's drawn up battle plans, assigned roles, and turned what could have been a chaotic mess into something resembling an actual military strategy. It's like watching someone who's spent months preparing for a presentation finally get their moment to shine. But here's where Orwell's genius really shows. While Snowball is leading charges and getting wounded in battle, literally bleeding for the cause, what's Napoleon doing? He's notably absent from the front lines. And this isn't just a small detail Orwell throws in for flavor. This is him showing us something profound about how different leaders respond to crisis. Some lead from the front, sharing the risks and the glory with their followers. Others prefer to stay safely in the background, ready to claim credit for victory or distance themselves from defeat. The battle itself becomes this incredible unifying moment. Old Benjamin, who usually couldn't care less about anything, actually joins the fight. The sheep, the hens, even the ducks, everyone contributes something to the defense of their new way of life. It's like watching a neighborhood come together during a natural disaster, where suddenly Mrs. Henderson from down the street, who you've barely spoken to in 5 years, is helping you sandbag your house. And they win. Against all odds, these farm animals defeat trained humans with weapons. It should be this triumphant moment, right? The ultimate validation that their revolution was worth it, that they really can govern themselves and defend what they've built. But Orwell doesn't let us bask in that victory for long, because he knows something we're just beginning to understand. External victories often accelerate internal conflicts. See, here's what happens after the dust settles. Suddenly, there's this question of who deserves the most credit. Snowball was clearly the military hero, the one who planned the defense and got wounded leading the charge. But Napoleon, well, he's got other ideas about how history should remember this day. And this is where we start seeing the seeds of something much darker taking root. Think about any workplace you've been in after a major success. Remember how quickly the conversation shifts from "we did it" to "I did it." How the people who were most visible during the victory start getting the lion's share of the credit, while others who contributed just as much get forgotten. That's exactly what's brewing here on Animal Farm, except the stakes are much higher than office politics. The Battle of Cowshed becomes this perfect laboratory for studying human nature, or in this case, animal nature that mirrors our own all too clearly. Orwell is showing us that external threats can indeed bring out the best in us, can make us more unified and capable than we ever imagined. But he's also warning us that these same moments of triumph can become the breeding ground for future conflicts, especially when there are ambitious individuals ready to rewrite history to serve their own purposes. As we move forward in our story, keep this battle in mind. Remember how genuine the unity felt in that moment, how real the cooperation was when survival was at stake. Because Orwell is about to show us just how quickly that solidarity can be weaponized, how even the most heroic moments can be twisted to serve the ambitions of those who know how to manipulate memory and meaning. The external threat is gone, but the internal battle for power is just beginning. Picture this. You're settling in with your morning coffee, and I want to tell you about one of the most fascinating power struggles in all of literature. We're diving deep into Animal Farm today, specifically that explosive clash between Napoleon and Snowball that feels eerily familiar to every political drama we've witnessed in our own lifetimes. You know how sometimes you watch two politicians debate, and you can practically feel the tension crackling through your television screen? Well, Orwell captured that exact same energy decades before cable news existed. Napoleon and Snowball represent two fundamentally different approaches to leadership, and their conflict isn't just some barnyard squabble. It's a masterclass in how power dynamics play out in every organization, from your workplace to entire nations. Let me paint you the scene. Here we have Snowball, the passionate idealist with grand visions dancing in his head. Think of him as that colleague who's always bursting with innovative ideas, the one who stays late sketching out elaborate plans on whiteboards, genuinely believing he can revolutionize everything. Snowball dreams of windmills that will bring electricity to the farm, of education programs for all animals, of technological progress that will make their lives easier. Sound familiar? He's like every startup founder who genuinely believes their app will change the world. Every politician promising transformation through infrastructure and education. Now think about this for a moment. When you encounter someone like Snowball in real life, what's your gut reaction? Part of you probably admires the enthusiasm, the vision, the sheer audacity of dreaming big. But another part of you might wonder if they're a bit naive, right? Because here's the thing about visionaries. They're often so focused on the destination that they sometimes miss the treacherous terrain of the journey. Enter Napoleon, and this is where things get really interesting. Napoleon operates from a completely different playbook. While Snowball is giving passionate speeches about five-year plans, Napoleon is quietly working behind the scenes, building alliances, accumulating influence. He's not the flashy speaker. He's the guy who remembers everyone's birthday, who shows up to every meeting, who slowly but surely makes himself indispensable. We all know someone like this, don't we? That person who never seems to be the loudest voice in the room, but somehow always ends up making the final decisions. What's absolutely chilling about their dynamic is how Napoleon uses Snowball's own strengths against him. Every time Snowball proposes something ambitious, like that famous windmill project, Napoleon doesn't argue with the merits of the idea itself. Instead, he plants seeds of doubt about timing, feasibility, priorities. He's mastered the art of appearing reasonable while systematically undermining his rival's credibility. It's political jiu-jitsu at its finest, using your opponent's momentum to throw them off balance. The Windmill Debate becomes this perfect microcosm of their entire relationship. Snowball presents detailed blueprints, cost-benefit analyses, timelines. He's done his homework. But Napoleon counters with something far more powerful than facts: fear. What if the windmill project leaves them vulnerable to attack? What if it's too ambitious? What if focusing on fancy technology means neglecting basic security and food production? Now here's the devastating part. Napoleon isn't entirely wrong. There are legitimate concerns buried within his objections, which makes his manipulation all the more effective. This reminds me of every corporate takeover I've ever witnessed. The innovative leader gets so caught up in selling their vision that they forget to watch their back, while the shrewd operator quietly builds coalitions and controls the narrative. It's like watching someone win a chess match by playing an entirely different game than their opponent. But here's where Orwell's genius really shines through. He shows us how quickly ideological differences can escalate into personal vendettas. What starts as honest disagreement about farm policy transforms into something much darker. Napoleon doesn't just want to defeat Snowball's ideas. He wants to eliminate Snowball entirely. And when that moment comes, when Napoleon unleashes those dogs he's been secretly training, we witness the exact moment when political opposition becomes authoritarian purge. Think about how many times we've seen this pattern repeat throughout history. Leaders who started as allies, united by shared principles, gradually drift apart as their different temperaments and tactics create friction. The pragmatist grows suspicious of the idealist's popularity, while the visionary becomes frustrated by the pragmatist's caution. Before you know it, they're not just disagreeing about policy, they're questioning each other's loyalty, competence, even basic humanity. What makes this particularly relevant today is how we see these same dynamics playing out in real time, whether it's corporate boardrooms, political parties, or even social movements. The tools might be different social media campaigns instead of trained dogs, but the fundamental patterns remain unchanged. Someone always emerges who understands that controlling the narrative matters more than having the best ideas, that building power often requires destroying others who might challenge that power. As we watch Napoleon's ultimate triumph unfold, we're witnessing something profound about human nature itself, something that transcends the barnyard and speaks directly to our modern moment. You know, there's something almost heartbreaking about watching hope get weaponized, and nowhere is this more painfully clear than in Orwell's depiction of the great Windmill Debate on Animal Farm. Picture this scene with me for a moment. Two pigs, Napoleon and Snowball, standing before their fellow animals with completely opposite visions for their future. One promises progress through innovation, the other security through tradition. Sound familiar? It should, because we're living through versions of this debate every single day. Let me paint you the picture Orwell gives us. Snowball, with his passionate speeches and detailed blueprints, envisions a magnificent windmill that will generate electricity, power machinery, and transform their backbreaking labor into something manageable. He speaks of shorter working hours, heated stalls in winter, and electric lighting that will extend their productive days. The animals listen with growing excitement, their eyes bright with possibility. Meanwhile, Napoleon sits in brooding silence, occasionally muttering that what they really need is to focus on food production and defense, not chase after fairy tales. Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever been in a meeting where two people present completely different solutions to the same problem? Maybe one colleague wants to invest in new technology, while another insists on sticking with proven methods. What Orwell shows us so brilliantly is that this isn't really about windmills at all. It's about power, and how competing ideas become the perfect camouflage for political maneuvering. Here's where it gets fascinating and terrifying at the same time. Snowball genuinely believes in his vision. He's done the research, drawn up plans, calculated the benefits. He's that friend we all know who gets genuinely excited about solving problems with innovation. But Napoleon understands something darker about human nature, or in this case, animal nature. He knows that it's easier to rule through fear and dependency than through empowerment and progress. The genius of Orwell's storytelling here is how he shows us that the content of the debate matters far less than who controls the narrative around it. Snowball can have all the best arguments in the world, but Napoleon has something more powerful. He's been quietly building loyalty through fear and intimidation. While Snowball was drawing blueprints, Napoleon was raising those puppies in secret, turning them into his personal enforcement squad. This reminds me of something I witnessed during a local election a few years back. Two candidates were debating school funding. One presented detailed plans for educational technology and teacher training programs. The other simply kept repeating that they needed to focus on safety and traditional values first. Guess which message resonated more with worried parents? The candidate with the detailed plans lost decisively, not because their ideas were wrong, but because fear is always a more immediate motivator than hope. What's chilling about the windmill debate is how it reveals the machinery of manipulation. Napoleon doesn't need to prove Snowball wrong, he just needs to make the animals doubt. He plants seeds of suspicion. Why is Snowball so eager to change things? What if this windmill project is just a way to make the animals work harder? What if they're being tricked? These questions don't need answers, they just need to create uncertainty. And here's the masterstroke of political manipulation that Orwell captures so perfectly. Once Napoleon seizes power and drives Snowball away, he adopts the Windmill Project as his own idea. Suddenly, this dangerous fantasy becomes a cornerstone of his leadership. The animals, confused but wanting to believe in their leader, convince themselves that Napoleon must have always supported the windmill. They even begin to doubt their own memories about who originally proposed it. Think about how often we see this pattern play out in our own political landscape. A policy idea gets rejected when proposed by one leader, only to be embraced months later when championed by their rival. The idea hasn't changed, but the power dynamics have. We're witnessing the same sleight of hand that Napoleon performed, just with different props. What makes this section of Animal Farm so relevant today is how it exposes the way legitimate policy debates become vehicles for power grabs. Every time we see politicians flip-flopping on positions, every time we watch ideas get dismissed not on their merits but based on who's proposing them, we're watching the windmill debate play out again. The tragedy isn't just that the animals lose Snowball's vision of progress, it's that they lose their ability to engage in genuine debate about their future. Once Napoleon consolidates power, there's no more room for competing ideas, only competing interpretations of Napoleon's ideas. The windmill gets built eventually, but not as a symbol of collective innovation and hope. Instead, it becomes a monument to Napoleon's authority, a constant reminder of who really controls the narrative on Animal Farm. As we sip our coffee and consider this tale, we might ask ourselves, in our own communities, our workplaces, our political systems, are we engaging with ideas on their merits, or are we letting power dynamics determine what we're willing to consider? Picture this. You're settling in with your morning coffee, maybe scrolling through the news, when you come across a story about someone being canceled or publicly shamed online. The mob mentality, the forced apologies, the way people turn on each other to save themselves. Sound familiar? Well, my friend, George Orwell painted this exact scenario decades before social media existed, and he did it through the lens of farm animals in one of literature's most chilling chapters. We've been following Napoleon's rise to power on Animal Farm, watching him slowly consolidate control, and now we're about to witness something that will make your coffee go cold. This is where Orwell shows us how authoritarian leaders don't just seize power, they purge anyone who might threaten it. And the methods they use, they're as old as civilization itself, yet as modern as your smartphone. The scene unfolds with Napoleon calling all the animals together for what seems like a routine meeting. But there's tension in the air, something electric and dangerous. The dogs, Napoleon's personal enforcers, are prowling around with an unusual intensity. Now, think about this for a moment. Have you ever been in a room where you could just feel that something was about to go terribly wrong? That's the atmosphere Orwell creates here, and it's masterful because it mirrors those moments in history when entire societies held their breath, sensing the storm coming. What happens next is a masterclass in manufactured terror. Napoleon begins by having his dogs drag forward several pigs who had previously opposed him. These aren't random accusations, mind you. These are calculated moves against specific threats to his authority. The pigs are forced to confess to crimes they may or may not have committed. They admit to collaborating with Snowball, the exiled pig who represents everything Napoleon fears about organized opposition. One by one, they confess, and one by one, the dogs tear their throats out. But here's where it gets truly sinister, and this is something we see playing out in our world today. The confessions don't stop with the obvious political enemies. Fear spreads like wildfire through the assembled animals. Hens step forward to confess to dream crimes, sheep admit to imaginary treasons, and even a goose confesses to hoarding grain. Think about this phenomenon. When people are terrified, when they see others being destroyed for supposed crimes, they begin to confess to things they never did, hoping that submission might save them. This isn't just fiction, my friend. This is documented human behavior. During Stalin's purges, which directly inspired this scene, millions of people confessed to crimes that existed only in the paranoid imagination of the regime. During the Salem witch trials, people confessed to dancing with the devil rather than face the alternative. And today, we see people apologizing for jokes they made years ago, for thoughts they once had, for associations that are suddenly deemed problematic. The mechanism is the same. Create an atmosphere of terror, and people will destroy themselves to survive. Orwell's genius here is showing us how this process works on multiple levels. Napoleon isn't just eliminating enemies. He's creating a spectacle that will terrorize the remaining animals into complete submission. Every animal watching this bloodbath is learning the same lesson. Dissent equals death, and even the appearance of dissent can be fatal. The message is clear. Keep your head down, don't ask questions, and certainly don't organize with others who might share your doubts. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of this purge is how it transforms the very nature of truth on the farm. After the bloodshed, Napoleon's regime begins rewriting history in real time. The animals who were just executed are retroactively painted as traitors who had always been working against the revolution. Their past contributions are erased. Their names become synonymous with betrayal. Sound familiar? This is what we call historical revisionism, and it's happening right now in various forms around the world. The psychological impact on the surviving animals is devastating. They're not just afraid, they're confused, isolated, and beginning to doubt their own memories and perceptions. When you can't trust your own experience of events, when the official narrative keeps shifting, when speaking out means rising everything, most people simply shut down. They become what Hannah Arendt called atomized individuals, cut off from each other, and therefore incapable of organized resistance. What makes this chapter so relevant today is how it illuminates the mechanics of modern cancel culture, political purges, and social media mob justice. The technology changes, but the human dynamics remain eerily consistent. Whether it's a barnyard in Orwell's imagination or a Twitter feed in 2024, the process is the same. Identify enemies, force public confessions, make examples of the guilty, and watch as everyone else polices themselves into silence. As we move forward in our journey through Animal Farm, we'll see how this purge fundamentally changes the farm's atmosphere. The animals' initial revolutionary enthusiasm has been replaced by fear and compliance. Napoleon has achieved something more powerful than mere obedience. He's created a population that's afraid to even think rebellious thoughts. And that, my friend, is how democracies die and dictatorships are born. You know, there's something deeply unsettling about watching the truth get twisted right before your eyes. And that's exactly what Orwell masterfully shows us in Animal Farm, when he explores how those in power reshape history to serve their needs. Picture yourself sitting around that coffee shop table where everyone's arguing about what really happened last week at the office meeting. Except now imagine one person has the power to make their version the only version that matters. And suddenly, you're in the world of Napoleon and his propaganda machine. The brilliance of Orwell's insight here is how he shows us that history isn't just about what happened. It's about who gets to tell the story. Think about those early days on Animal Farm when the animals could still remember old Major's original dream, when they could recall the real reasons behind their rebellion. But watch what happens as time passes and Napoleon consolidates his power. The past becomes as malleable as wet clay in a potter's hands, shaped and reshaped until it bears no resemblance to what actually occurred. Now think about this for a moment. In the book, we see Squealer, Napoleon's chief propagandist, constantly revising the commandments and rewriting the narrative of past events. Remember when Snowball was heroic during the Battle of the Cowshed? Well, suddenly Squealer is telling everyone that Snowball was actually a traitor all along, that he was secretly working with the humans. The animals who were there, who saw Snowball's bravery with their own eyes, begin to doubt their own memories. This is the terrifying power of controlled information, and it's happening right under our noses in ways that would make Orwell's head spin. Consider how this plays out in our digital age. We live in a time where information travels at the speed of light, where a single tweet can reshape public opinion, where algorithms decide what version of reality we see in our feeds. Just like the animals on the farm who gradually lose touch with their original revolutionary ideals, we can find ourselves accepting new versions of events simply because they're repeated often enough, loudly enough, by those who control the megaphone. The genius of Orwell's metaphor becomes even more apparent when you realize that the animals aren't stupid. They're not inherently gullible. They're busy, they're tired, they're focused on survival. Sound familiar? When you're working 2 jobs, managing family responsibilities, trying to keep your head above water, who has time to fact-check every piece of information that comes your way? This is exactly what Napoleon counts on, and it's exactly what modern manipulators of information count on too. But here's where Orwell's warning becomes particularly chilling. Notice how the rewriting of history isn't just about changing facts, it's about changing the very framework through which those facts are understood. When Napoleon claims that the windmill was always his idea, stolen by the treacherous Snowball, he's not just lying about who thought of it first. He's fundamentally altering the narrative of progress and innovation on the farm. He's making himself the hero of a story where he was originally the villain. This reminds me of that old joke about the man who insists he never borrowed his neighbor's pot, and besides, it was already cracked when he borrowed it. And anyway, he returned it in perfect condition. Except it's not funny when those in power use the same logic to rewrite entire chapters of our collective experience. We see this pattern repeating throughout history and in our contemporary world, where inconvenient truths are first denied, then minimized, then reframed as actually being positive developments all along. What makes Orwell's treatment of this theme so powerful is how he shows us that controlling information isn't just about suppressing opposition, it's about creating a new reality altogether. The animals don't just stop questioning Napoleon's version of events, they genuinely begin to believe that his version is the truth. Their memories become unreliable, their perceptions shift, and eventually they can't imagine things having been any different. Now, you might be wondering, how do we protect ourselves from this kind of manipulation? Orwell suggests through his narrative that the answer lies in maintaining our connection to authentic experience and independent thought. The character of Benjamin the donkey, cynical as he may be, represents a kind of intellectual resistance simply by refusing to get swept up in the collective amnesia that grips the farm. As we navigate our own information landscape, filled with competing narratives and alternative facts, Orwell's insights remain startlingly relevant. The past isn't just prologue. As Shakespeare said, it's the foundation upon which we build our understanding of the present and our hopes for the future. When that foundation becomes quicksand, constantly shifting beneath our feet, we lose more than just historical accuracy. We lose our ability to learn from experience, to hold our leaders accountable, and to maintain the shared reality that makes democratic discourse possible. And that brings us to perhaps the most important lesson Animal Farm teaches us about information control, which is how the manipulation of truth ultimately serves to concentrate power in fewer and fewer hands. So we've been sitting here talking about how revolutions begin with such pure intentions, haven't we? But now we need to address something that might make you shift uncomfortably in your chair as you sip that coffee. Because what Orwell shows us next in Animal Farm is perhaps the most chilling part of the entire story. How those beautiful, clear principles we talked about don't just disappear overnight. No, they're eroded so gradually, so cleverly, that by the time you notice what's happened, you're living in a completely different world than the one you thought you were building. Remember those 7 commandments painted on the barn wall? All animals are equal. No animal shall kill another animal. No animal shall drink alcohol. They seemed so permanent, didn't they? Carved in stone, or at least painted in white letters that everyone could see and remember. But here's where Orwell becomes absolutely brilliant in showing us how power corrupts not through dramatic overthrows, but through tiny, almost imperceptible changes that happen when we're not paying attention. Picture this scene that probably happened in your own workplace or community at some point. The pigs start making small exceptions to the rules. First, it's just Napoleon and the other pigs moving into the farmhouse, for practical reasons. They need a quiet place to do the important work of running the farm. Makes sense, right? But wasn't there something about no animal shall sleep in a bed? Well, when Clover and some of the other animals go to check the commandment, they discover it now reads, "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets." Ah, you see what happened there. The pigs were just sleeping on the beds, not with sheets. Totally different thing. Now, think about this for a moment. How many times have you seen this exact pattern play out in real life? A company starts with a mission statement about treating employees like family, but gradually the benefits get trimmed, the hours get longer, and somehow the original promise morphs into something barely recognizable. Or consider how social media platforms began with idealistic goals about connecting people and sharing information freely, only to evolve into sophisticated systems designed to capture attention and sell data. The original principles didn't vanish in a dramatic announcement. They were slowly, methodically reshaped until they served entirely different purposes. What's so insidious about this process is how Squealer, the propaganda pig, makes each change seem not just reasonable, but necessary for the greater good. When the pigs start drinking alcohol, clearly violating another commandment, Squealer explains that this was never really prohibited. The commandment, he insists, was against drinking alcohol to excess. The animals scratch their heads, wondering if they remembered it wrong. Surely Squealer, with his quick tongue and confident manner, must be right. After all, he has access to all those papers and documents they can't read. This is where Orwell's genius really shines through, because he's showing us something that happens in every society, every organization, every relationship where there's an imbalance of power. The people in charge don't usually announce that they're abandoning their principles. Instead, they reinterpret them. They add qualifications. They explain why the circumstances require a different understanding of what was originally meant. And if you question this, well, you're obviously misunderstanding the complexity of the situation. Think about how this plays out in modern politics, where campaign promises get clarified and contextualized until they mean something entirely different from what voters thought they were supporting. Or consider how terms of service agreements for apps and websites change constantly, with each update making the language a little more favorable to the company and a little less protective of users, but always presented as improvements or necessary updates for security reasons. But here's the most devastating part of Orwell's observation. By the time the animals realize what's happening, they've lost the ability to effectively resist. Their memories have been confused by constant reinterpretation. Their confidence in their own perceptions has been undermined. When Boxer, the loyal horse, begins to have doubts, he doesn't trust his own instincts. Instead, he works harder and repeats his mantra, "Napoleon is always right." The final commandment change is the most revealing of all. All the original 7 commandments disappear, replaced by a single rule. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. It's a sentence that should make no logical sense, yet it perfectly captures the twisted logic of how revolutionary ideals get corrupted. Everyone is still equal, you see. It's just that some people's equality is more important than others. This brings us to a crucial question we all need to ask ourselves. How do we protect the principles we believe in from this kind of gradual erosion? How do we maintain our ability to recognize when the rules of the game are being changed right in front of us? Because if Animal Farm teaches us anything, it's that the price of freedom isn't just eternal vigilance. It's the courage to trust our own eyes and memories, even when those in power tell us we're seeing things wrong. And that's a lesson that becomes more relevant every single day we live in this complex, rapidly changing world of ours. You know, there's this moment in Animal Farm that always makes me pause and think about how easily we can betray our deepest principles when things get tough. We've been talking about how the animals overthrew their human oppressors, full of hope and revolutionary fervor, but now we're going to explore one of the most chilling aspects of their story, how they ended up doing business with the very humans they once despised. Picture this scene with me for a moment. The animals had established their commandments, carved into the barn wall like sacred scripture. No animal shall trade with humans was as fundamental to their revolution as all animals are equal. These weren't just rules, they were the moral foundation of everything they'd fought for. But here's where Orwell shows us something profound about human nature, even when it's dressed up in animal form. When winter approaches and the windmill needs building, when food runs short and practical problems mount, those beautiful ideals start to feel like luxuries they can't afford. Napoleon, our increasingly authoritarian pig leader, begins to rationalize the unthinkable. First, it's just a small trade, some eggs for essential supplies. The hens protest, naturally, because these are their children we're talking about. But Napoleon's response is swift and brutal. He cuts off their food rations until they submit, and when some hens die of starvation, well, that's just the price of progress, isn't it? Now, think about this for a moment. How often do we see this pattern in our own world? A company starts with a mission to do no evil, then gradually compromises that mission for market share. A politician runs on principles of transparency and accountability, then discovers the messy realities of governance require a more flexible approach. We tell ourselves these compromises are temporary, necessary, pragmatic. Sound familiar? What's particularly brilliant about Orwell's storytelling here is how he shows us the machinery of rationalization at work. Squealer, the propaganda pig, doesn't just announce that they're abandoning their principles. Oh no, that would be too honest. Instead, he explains that they're not really trading with humans at all. They're simply engaging in necessary exchanges through intermediaries. The windmill isn't being built for human comfort, it's for the animal's benefit. These aren't compromises, they're strategic adaptations. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a friend who worked for a startup that began with noble intentions to democratize access to education. They started by offering free courses to underserved communities. But as funding pressures mounted, they began charging fees, then targeting wealthier demographics, then partnering with corporations that contradicted their original mission. At each step, my friend described how leadership framed these changes not as betrayals of their values, but as necessary evolutions that would ultimately serve their greater purpose. The parallels to Animal Farm were uncanny. The tragedy deepens when we realize that the animal's desperation is partly manufactured. Napoleon could have organized the farm more efficiently, could have prepared better for winter, could have found creative solutions that honored their principles. But crisis creates opportunity for authoritarians. When people are scared and hungry, they're willing to accept compromises they'd never consider in times of plenty. This brings us to one of the most unsettling aspects of this transformation, how quickly the animals begin to forget what they once believed. The commandments on the barn wall start changing, but so subtly that many animals convince themselves they must have misremembered the original words. No animal shall trade with humans becomes, no animal shall trade with humans without cause becomes, no animal shall trade with humans unnecessarily. Each modification feels reasonable in isolation, but together, they represent a complete abandonment of founding principles. You can see this psychological phenomenon everywhere in modern life. We have an incredible capacity to adjust our memories to match our current circumstances. The executive who once criticized corporate greed finds ways to justify their own excessive compensation. The activist who railed against political corruption discovers nuanced reasons why their preferred candidate's questionable funding sources are actually acceptable. We're remarkably skilled at protecting our self-image while betraying our values. What makes this section of Animal Farm so powerful is how Orwell doesn't present Napoleon as a mustache-twirling villain. The pig genuinely believes, or has convinced himself, that these compromises serve the greater good. He's not trying to destroy the revolution, he's trying to save it from impractical idealism. This makes him far more dangerous than a simple tyrant, because his corruption comes wrapped in the language of necessity and progress. As we move forward in our exploration of Animal Farm, we'll see how these initial compromises with human traitors set the stage for even greater betrayals. Because here's the thing about moral compromise: it's rarely a single dramatic fall. It's usually a series of small steps, each one seeming reasonable, until you look up and realize you've walked so far from your starting point that you can barely remember what you once believed. The animals who once dreamed of a world free from human exploitation are now dependent on human commerce, and the revolution that began with such hope is transforming into something unrecognizable. So we've watched the revolution unfold, seen the pigs gradually seize power, and witnessed the slow erosion of the animals' dreams. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares us for what happens to Boxer. If you've been following along with your coffee, you might want to take a sip now, because this is where Orwell delivers his most devastating blow about the nature of political betrayal. Picture this gentle giant, this massive cart horse whose entire existence revolves around two simple beliefs: I will work harder, and Napoleon is always right. Boxer represents something we all recognize, doesn't he? He's that colleague who stays late every night, that friend who always volunteers for the extra shift, that neighbor who shows up with a truck whenever someone needs help moving. Boxer embodies the working class at its most noble and, tragically, at its most vulnerable. Now think about this for a moment. What makes Boxer so dangerous to Napoleon's regime? It's not his strength, though he's certainly powerful. It's not his intelligence, because frankly, Boxer isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. No, what makes Boxer dangerous is his absolute moral authority among the other animals. When Boxer speaks, everyone listens. When Boxer endorses something, it carries weight. He's the kind of leader who leads by example rather than by words, and that's precisely why he must be eliminated. The setup is heartbreakingly simple. Boxer, now aging and worn down from years of backbreaking labor, collapses while working on Napoleon's latest vanity project. His lung gives out, he can barely breathe, and for the first time in his life, this engine of productivity has broken down. The other animals are genuinely concerned. They've watched Boxer sacrifice his health, his youth, his very life force for the good of Animal Farm. Surely, they think, surely Napoleon will take care of him now. And here's where Orwell's genius really shines. Napoleon does indeed promise to take care of Boxer. He announces that arrangements have been made to send Boxer to a hospital in town where he can receive proper medical treatment. The animals are relieved, even grateful. Finally, their beloved Boxer will get the care he deserves. It's a touching moment of faith in their leadership. But Benjamin, that cynical old donkey who's been watching everything unfold with growing alarm, notices something the others miss. When the van arrives to take Boxer away, Benjamin can read the writing on its side. And what does it say? Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler. The hospital van is actually a death wagon. Can you imagine the horror of this realization? Think about it in modern terms. It's like discovering that the retirement home your family promised to send your grandfather to is actually a crematorium. It's the ultimate betrayal wrapped in the language of care and compassion. Napoleon isn't just disposing of Boxer, he's profiting from his death, literally turning this loyal servant into glue and dog food. The scene that follows is absolutely gut-wrenching. Benjamin frantically tries to warn the other animals, racing around the barnyard, braying desperately. The animals finally understand and chase after the van, shouting for Boxer to escape. And Boxer, even in his weakened state, tries to kick his way out. But his strength, the very strength he gave so freely to the revolution, has been depleted by years of exploitation. The iron shoes that once struck fear into the hearts of humans in the Battle of Cowshed can barely scratch the walls of his prison. This isn't just a story about a horse, is it? This is about every worker who believed that their sacrifice would be remembered, every person who trusted that their loyalty would be rewarded, every individual who thought that working within the system would eventually lead to justice. How many times have we seen this pattern repeat throughout history? The factory worker laid off after decades of service, the soldier abandoned after returning from war, the activist disappeared after becoming inconvenient to the cause they helped create. What makes this betrayal even more insidious is how Napoleon spins it afterward. He delivers a touching eulogy for Boxer, praising his dedication and claiming that Boxer's final words were expressions of loyalty to Animal Farm and to Napoleon himself. It's a masterclass in propaganda, taking the very person you've murdered and turning them into a symbol of support for your regime. The dead, after all, make excellent spokespeople because they can't contradict your version of their story. This is where we see the complete moral bankruptcy of the revolutionary leadership. They've not only betrayed their principles, they've betrayed the very people who made their revolution possible. And they've done it while maintaining the fiction that they're the true guardians of the revolution's ideals. As we move toward the final chapters of Animal Farm, Boxer's fate serves as the ultimate proof that some revolutions don't just fail to deliver on their promises. They become the very thing they once claimed to oppose. The question Orwell leaves us with is haunting. When the revolutionaries become indistinguishable from the oppressors, what hope remains for genuine change? So we've journeyed through this incredible transformation on Animal Farm, watching as noble ideals slowly twisted into something unrecognizable. And now we arrive at perhaps the most chilling moment in all of literature. Picture this. You're settling in with your coffee. Maybe it's gotten a bit cold by now, and Orwell is about to show us something that will make your blood run even colder. The pigs are walking upright. Let that image sink in for a moment. These animals who once declared that anything on two legs was an enemy, who painted 4 legs good, 2 legs bad on the barn wall in bold letters, are now strutting around the farmyard on their hind legs like the humans they once despised. It's not just walking, though. They're carrying whips. They're wearing clothes. Napoleon himself sports a black coat, and the sight is so grotesque, so fundamentally wrong, that the other animals can barely process what they're seeing. Now think about this for a second. Have you ever watched someone you respected completely abandon their principles? Maybe it was a friend who swore they'd never sell out, then took a corporate job that went against everything they believed in. Or perhaps a politician who campaigned on transparency and accountability, only to become the very embodiment of corruption they once fought against. That sick feeling in your stomach when you realize the person you looked up to has become exactly what they once opposed. That's what the animals are experiencing, magnified 1,000 times over. But Orwell isn't just showing us pigs walking upright for shock value. This is the culmination of everything we've witnessed, the final piece of a puzzle that's been building since the very first chapter. Remember how it started. Old Major's dream of a world where animals would be free from human oppression, where every creature would be equal, where the strong would protect the weak instead of exploiting them. The revolution began with such pure intentions, such beautiful ideals. The animals genuinely believed they were creating something better, something just. And here's where it gets really unsettling, because we can trace every single step of this transformation. It didn't happen overnight. Napoleon didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a tyrant. No, it was gradual, almost imperceptible. First, the pigs needed special food because they were doing the mental work. Then they needed to live in the farmhouse because they required quiet for their important thinking. Each compromise seemed reasonable at the time. Each small betrayal of the original principles was justified by necessity, by the greater good, by the complexity of leadership that the other animals simply couldn't understand. The most heartbreaking part: the other animals keep trying to make sense of it all. They stand there watching Napoleon walk upright, and they're desperately searching their memories, trying to remember if this was always allowed, if maybe they misunderstood the commandments. Clover, that faithful old mare, actually tries to recite the principles of animalism, but the words feel strange in her mouth now. Everything has been rewritten, literally and figuratively. This is where Orwell's genius really shines through, because he's not just telling us a story about farm animals. He's holding up a mirror to human nature itself, to the way power corrupts even the most well-intentioned revolutionaries. Think about the French Revolution, how it began with cries of liberty, equality, and fraternity, only to descend into the terror. Or consider how many independence movements throughout history started with leaders who genuinely wanted to free their people from oppression, only to become oppressors themselves once they tasted power. But let's bring this closer to home, to our own daily lives. How many times have you seen someone get promoted to management and slowly become everything they used to complain about in their old boss? How often do we witness people who fight their way into positions of authority, claiming they want to change the system from within, only to discover that the system changes them instead? The pigs walking upright represent something even more profound than political corruption, though. It's about the fundamental human tendency to become what we fight against. Psychologists call this the abyss-gazing back phenomenon, after Nietzsche's famous warning that when you fight monsters, you risk becoming a monster yourself. The pigs didn't set out to become human oppressors, but in their struggle against human oppression, they gradually adopted human methods, human justifications, and ultimately, human nature itself. And perhaps most chillingly of all, by the end of this transformation, the pigs have convinced themselves that they were always meant to walk upright, that this was always the natural order of things. They've rewritten history so completely that even they believe their own lies. As we'll see in that final, devastating scene where the animals look from pig to man, and man to pig, unable to tell the difference anymore, Orwell shows us that the revolutionaries haven't just failed their revolution. They've become indistinguishable from everything the revolution was supposed to destroy. This brings us to that ultimate question that will haunt us long after we close the book and finish our coffee. Welcome back to our journey through George Orwell's Animal Farm, where we've been watching the slow, methodical transformation of a revolution into something its founders never intended. If you've just poured yourself that perfect cup of coffee, settle in, because we're about to witness one of literature's most chilling examples of how power corrupts absolutely. We've reached the point where the pigs have completely abandoned any pretense of equality. The famous commandment that once read "all animals are equal" now bears a sinister addition that turns the entire revolution on its head. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Now, think about this for a moment. How does something like this happen? How do we go from a noble dream of equality to this twisted logic that would make even the most creative politician blush? Orwell shows us that Napoleon and his inner circle have become indistinguishable from the human oppressors they once fought against. They walk on two legs, wear clothes, carry whips, and sleep in beds. The transformation is so complete that, when the other animals look through the farmhouse window at a gathering of pigs and humans, they can no longer tell which is which. It's a moment that sends chills down your spine, because it captures something profoundly true about how power operates in our world. Picture this scene: the animals pressing their faces against the glass, watching their former comrades laughing and drinking with their old enemies. The pigs have learned to play cards with the humans, and they're cheating just as skillfully as their new partners. This isn't just about farm animals anymore, is it? This is about every revolution that started with pure intentions and ended up creating new forms of the same old oppression. What makes this transformation so insidious is how gradual it was. Napoleon didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a dictator. Each step seemed reasonable, even necessary. First, it was just the pigs making decisions because they were more intelligent. Then it was special privileges because leadership required extra nutrition. Then it was separate living quarters because important work demanded concentration. Each compromise seemed small, each exception logical, until suddenly the exception became the rule, and the rule became whatever Napoleon said it was. This reminds me of how we see power concentrate in our modern world. Think about how tech companies started as scrappy startups promising to democratize information and connect the world, only to become massive corporations that control what we see, think, and even believe. Or consider how social movements begin with calls for justice and equality, but sometimes end up creating new hierarchies and new forms of exclusion. The pattern Orwell identified isn't confined to communist revolutions or totalitarian states. It's a human tendency that shows up wherever power exists. The genius of Orwell's storytelling lies in how he makes us feel the betrayal alongside the animals. We remember Old Major's dream, the excitement of the rebellion, the hope that filled the farm when the animals first drove out Mr. Jones. We remember Boxer's unwavering loyalty and tragic fate, Snowball's genuine idealism before his exile, and the simple faith of creatures who believed that their sacrifice would create something better. Now we watch as Napoleon toasts with the very humans the revolution was meant to overthrow. But here's what's particularly brilliant about this ending. Orwell doesn't just show us corruption, he shows us how corruption justifies itself. The pigs don't see themselves as betrayers of the revolution. In their minds, they've saved the farm, brought prosperity, created order out of chaos. They've convinced themselves that their privileges are necessary, their power justified, their methods the only practical way forward. Sound familiar? We see this psychological transformation everywhere in our world. Politicians who enter public service to help people gradually convince themselves that staying in power is the best way to serve the public good. Business leaders who start companies to solve problems eventually believe that maximizing shareholder value is their moral obligation. Even in our personal lives, we can find ourselves rationalizing small compromises until we've become people we wouldn't have recognized at the start. The phrase, "some animals are more equal than others," has become shorthand for this kind of doublethink. This ability to hold contradictory ideas without feeling any discomfort. It's the mental gymnastics that allows people to champion equality while maintaining systems that benefit them disproportionately. It's the cognitive dissonance that lets us criticize corruption while participating in it ourselves. As we close this chapter of our exploration, remember that Orwell wasn't just writing about Soviet Russia or even political systems in general. He was writing about us, about the human capacity for self-deception and the intoxicating nature of power. The question isn't whether we'll ever encounter Napoleons in our lives. The question is whether we'll recognize them when we do, and more importantly, whether we'll recognize the Napoleon within ourselves when power, however small, comes our way. Next time, we'll explore how Animal Farm's lessons continue to echo in our contemporary world, and why this story remains as relevant today as it was when Orwell first put pen to paper. Picture yourself settling into your favorite chair with that perfect cup of coffee, steam rising as we dive into one of the most chilling transformations in all of literature. We've watched the pigs rise to power, we've seen the commandments change before our very eyes, and now we're about to witness something truly sinister. How Napoleon and his inner circle turned the very idea of revolution into a permanent prison for everyone else. You know what's fascinating about Animal Farm? Orwell shows us that the most dangerous dictators aren't the ones who openly reject revolutionary ideals, but the ones who weaponize them. Napoleon doesn't abandon the rhetoric of revolution, he perfects it, turning it into a tool that keeps the animals perpetually enslaved while believing they're free. It's like watching a master magician, except instead of pulling rabbits from hats, he's pulling submission from the promise of liberation. Think about how this works in practice on the farm. Every time the animals question their deteriorating conditions, every time they wonder why they're working harder for less food while the pigs grow fatter, Napoleon's propaganda machine springs into action. Squealer appears with his smooth tongue and twisted logic, reminding them of the glorious revolution, warning them about the constant threat of Jones returning, painting any dissent as counter-revolutionary betrayal. The revolution, which was supposed to end their oppression, becomes the very mechanism that perpetuates it. Now, here's where it gets really clever and really disturbing. Napoleon doesn't just use revolutionary rhetoric to silence criticism, he uses it to make the animals complicit in their own oppression. When Boxer, that noble, hard-working horse, collapses from exhaustion and is sold to the glue factory, the pigs frame it as a revolutionary sacrifice. His death isn't murder or neglect, it's martyrdom for the cause. The animals aren't just victims anymore. They're participants in a sacred struggle that requires their suffering. Consider how this mirrors what we see in our own world today. How many times have you heard politicians invoke the spirit of founding fathers or revolutionary heroes to justify policies that would horrify those very same figures? How often do we see leaders wrap themselves in the flag of change while changing nothing but their own bank accounts? Orwell understood that the most effective tyranny doesn't crush the human spirit, it redirects it, channeling genuine desires for justice and freedom into systems that produce the exact opposite. The genius of Napoleon's approach is that it makes opposition almost impossible to articulate. How do you argue against the revolution when you are the revolution? How do you criticize the system when criticizing the system makes you, by definition, an enemy of everything good and pure? The animals find themselves trapped in a linguistic prison where the very words they might use to express their discontent have been colonized by their oppressors. This is why the changing of the commandments is so crucial to understanding Orwell's message. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Isn't just a clever contradiction, it's a perfect example of how revolutionary language gets corrupted. The pigs maintain the framework of equality while completely gutting its meaning. They preserve the form while destroying the substance, like keeping the shell of an egg after sucking out everything inside. But here's what makes this particularly relevant to our modern moment. We live in an age of permanent revolution. Every election is the most important election of our lifetime. Every policy debate is framed as a battle for the soul of the nation. Every social media post is either advancing the cause or betraying it. We're constantly told we're living through historic moments that require our unwavering loyalty to one side or another, and anyone who questions this framing is immediately suspect. The animals on the farm experience this same exhausting state of perpetual crisis. There's always an enemy at the gates, always a threat to the revolution that requires more sacrifice, more work, more unquestioning obedience. The revolution that was supposed to bring them rest instead brings them endless vigilance. The freedom they fought for becomes a burden they can never put down. What Orwell shows us through Napoleon's manipulation is that revolutionary rhetoric becomes most dangerous when it stops being about creating something new and starts being about preventing something else. Instead of building toward a better future, the animals find themselves perpetually defending against an imagined past. Their energy gets consumed not in creation but in protection, not in growth but in resistance to phantom threats. As we watch the final transformation of Animal Farm, where the pigs become indistinguishable from the humans they once opposed, we see the ultimate corruption of revolutionary ideals. The rhetoric remains, the symbols persist, but the revolution has become its own opposite, a machine for producing the very oppression it once promised to eliminate. And the most tragic part, the animals still believe they're free, even as they work themselves to death in service of their liberators turned masters. This is the eternal revolution Orwell warns us about, one that never ends because ending would mean its leaders lose their power, and one that never succeeds because success would mean they lose their purpose. Picture this. You're sitting with Orwell himself in a cozy London pub in 1945, and he's just finished telling you this incredible story about a farm where animals overthrow their human oppressors. You lean forward, coffee growing cold, and ask the question that's been burning in your mind. George, what were you really trying to tell us? That's exactly where we find ourselves now, because Animal Farm isn't just a clever tale about talking pigs and horses. It's Orwell's urgent warning letter to humanity, written in the language of fable so we'd never forget its lessons. Now, think about this for a moment. Why would a brilliant writer like Orwell choose farm animals to deliver one of the most important political messages of the 20th century? The answer is beautifully simple and devastatingly effective. He knew that if he wrote a dry political treatise about the dangers of totalitarianism, most people would never read it. But a story about animals, that gets past our defenses. It sneaks the medicine into the spoonful of sugar, and by the time we realize what's happening, the lesson has already taken root in our minds. The genius of Orwell's approach lies in how he shows us that the corruption of power isn't some abstract concept happening in distant countries to other people. It's a fundamental aspect of human nature that emerges wherever power exists. Remember how Napoleon starts as just another pig with revolutionary ideals. He's not born evil, wearing a tiny dictator's uniform. Instead, we watch him transform step by step, decision by decision, until he becomes everything the revolution fought against. This is Orwell's first crucial warning. Corruption doesn't announce itself with dramatic fanfare. It whispers sweet justifications and arrives wearing the mask of necessity. Consider how this plays out in our modern world. Think about that friend who got promoted to management and gradually became the micromanaging boss they once complained about. Or observe how social media influencers who start with authentic messages about helping others can slowly drift towards selling whatever pays the most, justifying it as providing value. These aren't character flaws unique to certain individuals. They're demonstrations of what Orwell understood. Power has its own gravitational pull, and resisting it requires constant, conscious effort. But here's where Orwell's warning becomes even more chilling. He shows us that the corrupted don't just change themselves. They systematically rewrite reality to maintain their position. Remember how the 7 commandments of animalism get quietly altered. All animals are equal becomes, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. This isn't just clever wordplay. It's a masterclass in how authoritarian systems operate by controlling language and, through language, thought itself. Now think about this in today's context. How often do we see politicians, corporate leaders, or even people in our own lives gradually shift their stated principles to match their actions, rather than changing their actions to match their principles? Orwell anticipated our current struggles with alternative facts and the weaponization of information. He understood that those in power don't just want to control what we do. They want to control what we think and remember. The tragedy of Animal Farm isn't that the revolution fails, but that it succeeds too well. The animals do overthrow their oppressor, they do create their ideal society, and then they watch it transform into something worse than what they started with. This is perhaps Orwell's most sobering insight. The greatest threat to freedom often comes not from obvious enemies, but from those who claim to be its greatest defenders. The most dangerous tyrants are those who genuinely believe they're saving us. What makes this warning timeless is how Orwell shows us that this pattern isn't limited to political revolutions. It happens in families where parents become controlling in the name of protection. It occurs in workplaces where managers implement increasingly restrictive policies for everyone's benefit. It emerges in communities where leaders gradually accumulate power for the greater good. The scale changes, but the fundamental dynamic remains eerily consistent. Yet Orwell's warning isn't meant to make us cynical or passive. Quite the opposite. By understanding these patterns, we become capable of recognizing them early, in ourselves and others. When we catch ourselves justifying small compromises of our principles, we can hear Napoleon's voice and pause. When we see leaders changing the rules to benefit themselves while claiming it serves everyone, we can remember the fate of the 7 Commandments. The most profound lesson Orwell offers isn't political, it's personal. He's asking each of us to look in the mirror and honestly assess. If we had power, would we use it any differently? Would we be the exception to the rule, or would we, like Napoleon, gradually convince ourselves that our increasing privileges are necessary sacrifices for the greater good? This uncomfortable self-examination is exactly what Orwell intended, because recognizing our own capacity for corruption is the first step in guarding against it. As we close this exploration of Orwell's warning, remember that Animal Farm endures not because it predicted specific historical events, but because it illuminated eternal truths about human nature that remain as relevant today as they were in 1945. Animal Farm isn't just a story about rebellious farm animals. It's a mirror reflecting the dangerous patterns that emerge whenever power goes unchecked. Orwell crafted this deceptively simple tale to show us how noble ideals can be corrupted, how language can be weaponized, and how ordinary people can lose their freedom one small compromise at a time. The pig's transformation from revolutionary leaders to oppressive tyrants happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, which is precisely what makes it so chilling and so relevant to our own lives. Here are the key lessons we can carry forward. First, question authority consistently, especially when it claims to act in your best interest. Start incredibly small. When someone in power makes a claim, ask yourself, what evidence supports this? Who benefits? Whether it's a boss, politician, or influencer, develop the habit of gentle skepticism. Don't accept because I said so as sufficient reasoning. Second, pay attention to how language is being used around you. When you hear phrases like alternative facts, for the greater good, or trust the process, pause and dig deeper. Notice when simple concepts get buried under complicated jargon. In your own communication, choose clarity over cleverness. Say what you mean directly and honestly. Third, remember that rights and freedoms require active protection. They're not permanently guaranteed just because they exist today. Stay informed about decisions that affect your community. Vote. Speak up when you see unfairness. Be patient with yourself, as you learn civic engagement is a skill that develops over time. Fourth, recognize the power of collective action and its vulnerabilities. The animals' initial unity was their strength, but their gradual division became their downfall. In your own life, build genuine relationships based on shared values, not just shared complaints. When working toward change, focus on principles that unite rather than personalities that divide. Finally, stay vigilant about your own capacity for corruption. The pigs didn't start evil, they became corrupted by power gradually. If you find yourself in leadership positions, actively seek feedback, admit mistakes, and remember that your role is to serve others, not yourself. Power reveals character. Make sure yours can withstand the test. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below with at least one idea from this book that stuck with you, one concept you're going to carry forward. It could be something that challenged your thinking, something you want to try, or even something you disagreed with. Your insight might be exactly what another listener needs to hear today. And if this summary gave you something valuable, a new perspective, a spark of motivation, or even just a peaceful hour with your coffee, share it with someone who might need it too. Subscribe to One Book, One Coffee, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a new summary. Every week, we sit down together with one great book, one warm cup of coffee, and the simple belief that wisdom, shared well, can change lives. Until next time, keep reading, keep growing, and remember, every small step counts. See you at the next book.